Whenever you're ready, Chris.
Am I all set?
Yes, go.
All right. Okay. June 18th, 1815. When you hear this, what comes to mind? It signified the end of the Napoleonic era in France, because it was on this day that Napoleon Bonaparte was defeated in the little village of Waterloo at the hands of one of Britain's most distinguished and famous military leaders of all time. That man was Arthur Wellesley, but he's more commonly referred to as the Duke of Wellington. Wellington's legacy went beyond just this single battle. What made the Duke honored in history as one of the greatest military leaders of all time? Well, the Duke spent most of his teen years in the midst of military campaigns. He attended the best military schools in Britain. He traveled all around the world, from Flanders to India, but his military brilliance shined in Spain, where he made his mark. While he would eventually escort the French out of the country, his standing accomplishment of military instinct was the ability to use the defensive. This was epitomized by the fortifications he laid out all throughout the Spanish countryside. The French were like a fish out of water. They were bamboozled, and they did not realize what they were in store for. Ironically, Wellington kept most of his plans secret. He would not tell even his most senior officers, for fear of word of his plans would leak out to the French. This was ironic, but was a very smart move. Just imagine if the French were aware of Wellington's fortifications. Wellington's military mind did not stop there. The recipe of using a cautious and defensive strategy proved to be 100% successful. But what happened to the distraught French army? The Duke would continue to shoo the various French marshals out of Spain time and time again. Wellington's training in Spain was the launch pad for the epic clash of what we all know today as Waterloo. Now, this battle would have one of two outcomes for the Duke. Either Napoleon would survive or Napoleon would be conquered. Wellington had courage in so many ways that went beyond simply fighting against Napoleon and his army on the battlefield. Wellington would have to have confidence in himself and his military skills. Wellington would have to have confidence in the capacity of his troops. Wellington would have to have the ability to trust his allies. Wellington was chosen to be the one to stand up against Napoleon once and for all, and so Wellington would have to accept the challenge, which is precisely what he would do. The fate of Europe hung in the balance, and he behaved with the same cool and the same calm nerves that he had all throughout his military career. It takes tremendous strength to be in such a momentous situation. Even before the battle began, while he was sitting in Brussels, Belgium, which was grimacing with fear, just knowing that Napoleon was on the move, Wellington told a citizen, quote, "You may give your ball with the greatest safety, without fear of interruption." As Wellington left, he realized that Napoleon was a lot closer than he thought. What was his reaction? He gathered his army together to go on the march the next day, and the chase to find Napoleon began. Wellington was undermanned, but his coolness and his assurance showed his strength as he fought the French with every muscle in his army. Wellington did not give in to defeat, but became even more confident of his men and of himself. It's amazing to wonder how, when Napoleon stood on the other side of the battlefield, and knowing how much importance it was that Wellington be victorious, how he could have so much smooth conduct. Fortunately, the line was not broken, and finally, the claw of Napoleon was gone once and for all. Wellington was at the pinnacle of his career after Waterloo. By 1828, he rose to the highest office in the British government, Prime Minister. Although his term was short-lived, he did pass one piece of legislation that showed his unwillingness to yield to peer pressure and gave Catholic freedom to England. In this situation, Wellington exemplified yet another variation of courage. He grew tired of the anti-Catholic feeling that still found a home in England. Would he yield to the aloof Catholic feeling that was part of British tradition, but remain Prime Minister, or would he grant Catholic freedom at the cost of losing his post as Prime Minister? Wellington eased up with the restrictions on Catholics, and so, to much of England's dismay, Wellington passed his legislation through Parliament, a challenge which was successful. What was the consequence? Wellington was thrown away as Prime Minister, but because of his fortitude, he once again took on a very difficult obstacle that this time was not on the battlefield. Wellington is universally considered one of England's greatest generals, and how accurate that is. His calmness and fortitude in himself and of his army helped him prevail throughout his life. The Duke was not afraid to take on any obstacle that crossed his path. In every situation, he never lost his nerve for a second. His calmness and daring in himself and of his army helped him prevail throughout his life. He was a leader that had as much fearlessness as anybody, and it was that courage and that leadership which saved Europe from the wrath of Napoleon, and it was that courage and that leadership which planted the seeds for the beginning of Catholic freedom in England. The Duke would reflect, after the Battle of Waterloo, that, quote, "Next to a battle lost, the greatest misery is a battle gained."